The orbital station above the world of Terran was never quiet. Traders, diplomats, explorers, and drifters from 100 different species moved through its long corridors each day. The sound of boots, claws, hooves, and mechanical limbs filled the air in a restless rhythm. The lights of the docking bays never dimmed, and the smell of fuel and recycled air never faded. To most, it was a place of business, noise, and constant motion. Aaron, a young archivist from the Zale species, sat at his assigned post on the upper observation deck. His role was not to trade or fight, but to record. The Zale believed that every event, no matter how small, shaped the path of the galaxy. He was trained to watch, listen, and write down the details of daily life aboard the station. Most of the time it was routine. He wrote of merchants arguing over trade fees, of diplomats exchanging formal greetings, of travelers searching for their gates. Nothing unusual, nothing exciting. That changed when he saw her. The human shuttle arrived without fanfare. It was smaller than most ships that docked there, carrying only a handful of passengers. Humans were not rare anymore, but they were not yet common either. Other species had grown used to their presence in the last few decades, yet they still looked at them as if trying to decide what they truly were. Too young to be respected as an ancient race, too persistent to be ignored as a minor one. From the shuttle walked a woman. She was not tall compared to the armored warriors of the station, nor brightly dressed like the jewel-covered traders from the core. She wore simple travel clothes, plain and functional. There was no guard escort, no servants to carry her things, no companions walking at her side. She entered quietly, and the crowd barely noticed her. Aaron did. At first it was only because of his duty. The arrival of a human was worth noting, as humans often carried new ideas, strange customs, or questions that unsettled others. He adjusted the lens of his recorder and prepared to describe her appearance. Then she lifted her head and her eyes moved across the hall. For a single moment they met his. Her look was not sharp, not threatening, and not dismissive. It was calm, direct, and unbroken. In that instant, Aaron felt as if she had measured him and found something worth remembering. He could not explain why it struck him so deeply. She looked at many others as she crossed the hall, but for him it felt different, as if she had spoken without words. Aaron wrote quickly in his notes. A human woman entered without sound. Her presence carried weight beyond her steps. He stopped, frowned at his own sentence, and wondered if he was letting his imagination run too far. Archivists were trained to be precise, to record facts, not feelings. Yet he could not deny that her simple glance had left him unsettled. The woman walked with steady steps toward the central concourse. She did not hurry, but neither did she wander. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, though she carried no map and asked no one for directions. The crowd parted around her without realizing it. Some gave her a brief glance, most ignored her, but none stepped into her path. Aaron followed from the balcony above. His duty allowed him to observe as long as he did not interfere. The woman stopped once near a cluster of tall crystalline beings from the Volari Union. They were in the middle of a debate, their voices echoing like glass chimes. She paused and listened for a short moment. Then she spoke a single sentence to them, her voice soft but clear. Aaron could not hear the words, but he saw the reaction. The Volari paused, tilted their faceted heads, and then lowered their tones as if they had been reminded of something. The woman continued on her way, leaving them strangely quiet. Aaron scribbled again in his notes. She spoke once and the noise lessened. The effect cannot be explained. He tapped his recorder nervously. Was this important? Or was it only coincidence? He did not know. But something in him urged him to keep writing. The station carried beings of every shape, from massive scaled warriors to fragile insectoid scholars. Many carried weapons, many wore advanced armor, many displayed the symbols of power. The human woman carried nothing. Yet the space around her felt heavier than the weapons and armor combined. Aaron remembered his teacher's words. The galaxy often mistakes silence for weakness. Record carefully, for silence sometimes speaks the loudest. He leaned closer to the balcony rail as she reached the heart of the station. There, under the vast dome of light, stood a monument of unity. A circle of banners represented each major empire that had signed the Accord of Terran, the treaty that allowed this neutral ground to exist. It was a place of ceremony and importance. Travelers often paused to look, but few lingered long. The woman stopped in front of the banners. She looked at them with the same steady gaze she had given Aaron. For a long time she remained still. Around her the crowd moved on, but she did not move. Erin realized she was studying the banners not with admiration, but as if she were searching for something hidden within them. Finally, she whispered a question. Erin was too far to hear clearly, but he thought the words were, "What do they fear most?" The archivist felt a chill. It was not the kind of question travelers asked. Visitors usually asked where to eat, where to sleep, where to find business. Her question carried a different weight. It was not about comfort, but about truth. She turned away from the monument and walked down a side corridor, vanishing into the lower levels of the station. Aaron sat back in his chair, his hands shaking slightly. He had recorded hundreds of arrivals before. Merchants with loud voices, warriors with gleaming armor, diplomats with prepared speeches. None of them had left such an impression. A woman had walked in quietly, looked at him once, and asked a question that unsettled his thoughts. He wrote one last line in his record before ending the entry for the day. Her presence was quiet, but it feels as if the course of events has already shifted. I cannot yet say how or why. I only know nothing feels the same. Aaron closed the recorder, yet his mind did not rest. He found himself looking toward the corridor where she had vanished, wondering what her next step would be and why he already believed it would matter. The station returned to its restless noise, but Aaron's thoughts did not. He continued his daily duties, recording the endless motions of traders, diplomats, and guards. Yet his mind circled back to the human woman. He had written her arrival in his archive, but words on a screen could not capture the strange gravity she carried. He told himself she was just another traveler passing through, but the memory of her gaze did not fade. Later that cycle, Aaron's curiosity grew too strong to ignore. Archivists were not supposed to follow travelers. Their role was to observe from a distance, not to involve themselves. Yet he found himself walking down the same corridor where the woman had disappeared. The lower levels of the station were quieter, filled with repair crews, storage halls, and smaller docking bays. Few diplomats wandered there. He searched for some time before he saw her again. She stood near a wide viewing port, looking out at the planet below. The light of Terran shone against the glass, reflecting across her face. She was not speaking to anyone, not using any device, simply standing in silence. Aaron almost turned back, ashamed of his own boldness, but before he could retreat, she spoke. "You followed me." Her voice was calm, not accusing, not surprised. Aaron froze, unsure how to reply. He was trained to record events, not to be questioned by them. Still, he gathered his courage and answered with honesty. "I am an archivist. It is my task to record what happens on this station. When you arrived, you asked something I did not understand. I thought perhaps it should be remembered more carefully." The woman turned from the window and studied him. Her eyes were steady, the same as when she had first looked at him. For a moment, Aaron felt again the strange weight in her gaze, as though she saw not only his form but his thoughts as well. "You wrote my words," she said. "Yes," Aaron admitted. "You asked what they fear most. But I do not know who you meant by they. Did you mean the empires, the travelers, or perhaps the station itself?" Her lips curved slightly, though it was not quite a smile. "I meant all of them. Every banner in that circle of flags. Every envoy who bows and speaks in fine words. Every empire that claims strength. They each carry a fear. I wanted to know if anyone else could see it." Aaron felt his chest tighten. This was not the way most travelers spoke. He thought carefully before answering. "Fear is not often written in records. We record laws, agreements, and speeches, but fear is not spoken in public halls. Yet it guides them," the woman said quietly. "It shapes their choices more than the words of their treaties. The Valari fear losing order, the Karath fear silence, the Raylan fear that others will forget them. I have seen it again and again. It is what drives them to fight, trade, and scheme." Aaron tilted his head. "And humans? What do they fear most?" She did not answer right away. She looked again through the viewing port, her eyes fixed on the wide horizon of the planet below. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "We fear being ignored. To us, silence is worse than rejection. We are too young, too small, to be counted among the ancient powers. If the galaxy decides we do not matter, that will wound us more than any battle." Aaron wrote her words into his recorder, though his hand trembled as he did. It was not the kind of entry his masters expected. It was not a trade agreement or a ship manifest. It was raw, personal, and filled with meaning. He almost feared that others would see it as unworthy of the archives, yet He could not leave it unwritten. The woman stepped closer to the window, as if speaking more to herself than to him. When I look at those banners, I see pride, but I also see cracks. They have ruled so long they believe nothing can change. Yet change comes quietly. It enters without sound, and when it looks them in the eye, they will not be ready. Aaron thought of her first arrival, of how she had walked through the crowd unnoticed. He wondered if this was what she meant. Change did not always announce itself with warships or declarations. Sometimes it came in the form of a single traveler who asked the wrong question, or perhaps the right one. Before he could ask more, a group of station workers passed through the hall carrying equipment. They nodded politely to the woman and gave Aaron a curious glance, but continued without stopping. The moment of privacy was broken, and Aaron stepped back respectfully. "I should return to my post," he said. "But may I ask your name for the record?" She looked at him for a long moment, then replied simply, "Mara." Aaron bowed slightly, his species' way of showing respect. "I thank you, Mara. Your words will be remembered." When he left her side, his mind was restless. He climbed back to the upper levels of the station and resumed his duties, yet every note he wrote seemed thin compared to the conversation he had just recorded. For the first time, he felt that the true story of the station was not in its official ceremonies or in the loud arguments of merchants. It was hidden in questions that most ignored. That evening, Aaron's supervisor, Master Archivist Dorel, reviewed the day's entries. He was an elder of the Zale, his tall form wrapped in the silver robes of their order. His eyes scanned the records with care. When he reached Aaron's notes about Mara, his gaze lingered longer than usual. "You recorded much about this human," Dorel said. His voice was calm but carried a tone of judgment. Aaron straightened in his chair. "Yes, Master." She spoke words that seemed important. Dorel looked at him steadily. "An archivist must separate importance from distraction. Do you believe her words are part of the greater path of history?" Aaron swallowed. "I believe they may be. She speaks as though she sees through the banners, through the speeches. She asks questions I have not heard before." The elder remained silent for a moment, then closed the file. "Very well. Keep watching. If her presence changes the current of events, it must be written. If not, it will fade and no harm is done." Aaron bowed, relieved. His master had not dismissed the record. He felt encouraged, though also aware that he had taken a risk. That night, as the station's lights dimmed to simulate rest hours, Aaron dreamed uneasily. In his dreams, the banners of the Accord stood tall in the great hall, but each one trembled as if stirred by an unseen wind. From the shadows stepped Mara, her quiet gaze sweeping across them. One by one, the banners lowered, as though her presence alone had shifted their weight. Aaron woke with a start, his heart racing. He knew dreams were not archives, yet he could not shake the image. He told himself it was only his mind replaying her words. Still, a part of him wondered if he had glimpsed something more. The next cycle, the station would hold a gathering of delegates from rival empires. Tensions were already high over a trade dispute, and security teams were preparing for unrest. Aaron prepared his recorder, expecting a long day of arguments. Yet beneath his duty, one thought remained. Mara had asked what they fear most. Soon he suspected the answer would reveal itself. The station of Tehran was never still, but on the day of the great meeting the energy was heavier than usual. Flags of many empires stood tall in the central hall, and guards lined the edges with weapons ready. Traders were moved to outer markets, and only diplomats and staff were allowed into the main concourse. The air felt thick with tension, as if every voice waited for an excuse to rise. Aaron sat in the archivist's gallery above the chamber. His recorder rested on his knees, its lens focused on the gathering below. He had written countless meetings before, filled with long speeches and repeated arguments, yet today felt different. He did not know if it was because of Mara's question still echoing in his mind, or if the unease was truly sharper in the air. Either way, his hands were already restless before the first envoy spoke. The debate began with words as usual. The Kuroth envoys argued that their trade routes were being taxed unfairly. The Valari countered with sharp tones, claiming the Kuroth had broken earlier agreements. The Raylan raised their voices to accuse both sides of dishonor. Each group spoke in their own style, polished yet heated. The words clashed, rose and tangled in the air until the chamber shook with sound. Aaron wrote quickly, his notes struggling to keep pace. He saw the guards shift uneasily, their hands close to their weapons. Every envoy seemed ready to accuse, none ready to yield. The banners above their heads swayed in the currents of the ventilation system, almost as if they trembled. Then the first blow was struck. A Kuroth envoy, his scales glittering under the lights, slammed his clawed hand on the table and shouted that no agreement was possible. He turned, storming from his place, and in that sudden movement a Valari guard stepped forward too quickly. Weapons were drawn in an instant. The sound of energy cells powering up echoed like thunder. The chamber broke into chaos. Arin's chest tightened. He had seen disputes before, but never had weapons been raised inside the Accord Hall itself. The guards of each faction stood in tense lines, ready to defend their envoys. The voices of the diplomats rose to shouts, but no one listened. It was as if the very Treaty of Tehran was about to shatter before his eyes. And then, into the storm, a single human voice rose. Stop. The word was not loud. It was not shouted over the weapons or the anger. Yet it carried. Every ear turned, every movement slowed, because the tone held no fear. Mara stood in the center of the hall. Aaron had not seen her enter, but there she was, plain and unarmed. Her simple travel clothes looked almost out of place among the silk robes and armored uniforms. She did not raise her hands. She did not move toward anyone. She only spoke again, with calm that felt sharper than a blade. You all came here to prove strength. But strength is not the power to strike first. True strength is the power to hold your strike when anger burns the hottest. For a moment the guards hesitated, weapons still raised. The envoy stared at her as if unsure how a single uninvited human had taken the floor. Arin's recorder shook in his hands. He could not look away. Mara stepped forward one pace. Her eyes moved across the hall, meeting the gaze of each envoy in turn. Her voice remained steady. You fear loss. The Valari fear chaos. The Kuroth fear silence in their halls. The Raylan fear they will be forgotten. You let these fears speak louder than reason. And yet you stand here together under the accord. If you strike now, your fear wins. If you lower your weapons, you win. Her words were simple. No complex diplomacy, no hidden trick, yet they cut through the chamber like light through smoke. Slowly, as if against their own pride, the guards lowered their weapons. The envoys' voices faltered. Silence filled the hall, but it was a silence of choice, not defeat. Arin's heart pounded. He had never seen anything like it. Not even the most skilled negotiators of the Zale or the most commanding voices of the Valari had managed such a thing. A human, without title or army, had shifted the course of the room with nothing but presence and words. One envoy finally spoke, his tone low and uncertain. Who are you to tell us these things? You do not represent an empire here. Mara met his gaze. I do not need an empire. I am human. That is enough. The words fell heavy. To some, it sounded arrogant, to others defiant, yet no one dared answer her with violence. The envoys looked at one another, searching for a path forward. After a long pause, the Kuroth envoy who had begun the storm spoke again, his tone softer than before. Perhaps we spoke too quickly. Let the discussion continue. And so it did. Voices returned, but lower, calmer, touched with caution. Weapons were holstered. The banners swayed gently once more. The threat of disaster had passed, though the tension had not vanished completely. From the gallery, Aaron struggled to steady his hand as he wrote. He had recorded wars, disputes, and ceremonies, but never had he seen one traveler shift the balance so clearly. He remembered her question from before. What do they fear most? She had answered it not with explanation, but with proof. When the meeting ended, many envoys left in silence, their pride dented but their treaty preserved. The guards dispersed with unease still in their eyes, yet all spoke in whispers of the human who had intervened. Some were angry, some curious, but none dismissed her. Aaron left the gallery and hurried through the corridors until he found her again. She walked calmly through the station, as if nothing unusual had happened. Travelers passed her without recognition, unaware that she had just prevented bloodshed in the Accord Hall. He stepped forward, bowing quickly. Mara, what you did, I have never seen such a thing. You silenced weapons with only words. How is that possible? She looked at him with the same calm eyes as always. Words are not weak, Aaron. Words are choices. In the moment before a weapon is fired, the choice is still alive. Speak to that choice, and even the fiercest may hesitate. Aaron felt a shiver. He had always believed his work as an archivist was to preserve history as it happened. Now he wondered if he was standing inside history as it was being made, if Mara was the spark that would one day grow into something far greater. Do you understand what this means? He asked quietly. Mara tilted her head. It means nothing if they forget tomorrow. It means everything if they remember. She continued walking, leaving Aaron behind with his recorder still clutched in his hands. He watched her disappear into the crowd once more, quiet and unnoticed, and yet he knew the truth. The station was no longer the same. The galaxy might never be the same. In his archive that night, Aaron wrote carefully, each word deliberate. A human stood in the Hall of Banners and turned anger into silence. She spoke of fear, and in her presence weapons lowered. I do not know if this is the start of change, but I feel certain nothing will remain as it was. He closed the entry, but the weight of the day did not leave him. He had seen proof that humanity carried a strength the galaxy had not measured. It was not in fleets or weapons, but in the will to speak when silence would mean ruin. And as he drifted into uneasy rest, Aaron knew one thing with clarity. Mara had not finished. This was only the beginning. The station of Tehran remained standing after the great argument, but the air felt different. The banners in the Accord chamber still hung in their circle, yet they seemed less firm than before. Every envoy who left that meeting carried whispers on their tongues. They spoke of the strange human woman who had stood unarmed among them and made their weapons lower. Some said it was luck, some said it was trickery, and a few admitted it was strength of a kind they did not understand. For Aaron, the archivist, the day had not ended when he closed his recorder. His mind circled around Mara's words again and again. He had been trained to write facts and to let history judge them, but this felt different. He wondered if history itself had been altered by her presence. The following cycle, envoys and guards gathered in smaller chambers. They wanted to question Mara. Not as an invited guest, not as a recognized leader, but as a curiosity. How could a single human without armies or titles walk into the center of power and speak in such a way? Aaron was present, of course. His role was to observe, and his masters had ordered him to record the discussion carefully. He entered the chamber quietly and took his seat at the side, his recorder already active. Mara sat in the middle of the room. She looked no different than before. Plain clothes, calm eyes, no sign of pride or fear. Around her sat envoys from several empires, their robes and armor bright under the lights. They were larger than her, louder than her, and older than her kind in the measure of galactic time. Yet none of them could ignore her now. The first to speak was the Valari envoy, his crystalline form glinting like glass. Human, you spoke in our chamber as if you were one of us. You held no right to do so. Why should we not remove you from this station? Mara met his bright gaze without flinching. Because you listened. If my words had no weight, they would have fallen empty. Yet you paused. That pause saved your banners from falling. I did not force you. I only reminded you of your choice. The envoy's crystal facets shifted, and he gave no reply. Another voice rose, this time from the Kuroth envoy. His scales shimmered under the light, his eyes narrow with suspicion. Words are thin. Armies decide the future. What does a human army hold against the fleets of the Kuroth or the Velari or the Raylan? You stand here only because we allow it. Mara nodded once. Armies decide battles, but fear decides when battles begin. I speak to fear. That is why your weapons lowered. The chamber grew still. Even Aaron forgot to breathe for a moment. No one spoke to the envoys in this way. Diplomats used long sentences, careful phrases, and respectful bows. Mara's words were plain, almost simple, yet they struck deeper than any polished speech. The Raylan envoy leaned forward, his voice softer, but edged with curiosity. You claim to know fear. Tell me then, what do humans fear most? Mara answered without delay. We fear being ignored, to be told we do not matter, to be unseen while others shape the stars. That fear drives us to speak, to reach out, to stand in halls where we were not invited. You may see it as weakness. I see it as strength because it will not let us remain silent. Aaron wrote every word, his recorder filling with her voice. He felt as though the chamber itself had grown heavier, as if the gravity had shifted under her answer. The envoys shifted in their seats, some restless, some thoughtful. None could dismiss her completely. The Valari envoy finally said, "You have no seat among us, yet you claim to speak with authority. Where does this authority come from?" Mara's gaze swept across the circle of faces. Her tone was steady, but her words carried weight. "I do not claim authority. I claim responsibility. Silence in the face of ruin is a choice I will not make. If that unsettles you, then perhaps your banners are weaker than you admit." The chamber fell into silence. Aaron's hands trembled as he wrote, for he knew he was recording words that would echo far beyond this room. After a long pause, the Raylan envoy rose to his feet. "This human speaks as if she were one of the Accord. Yet she is not. Perhaps the question is not whether she should remain here, but whether we should change the Accord itself." The suggestion rippled through the room like a shockwave. The idea that humanity might one day hold a seat among the ancient powers was unthinkable to many, but now it had been spoken aloud. Arguments rose again, though less fierce than before. Some envoys rejected the thought, others considered it. Mara remained seated, her hands resting calmly on her knees as if the outcome did not trouble her. At last, the debate ended without decision. The envoys would not yet grant humanity a place, but they could not ignore the question anymore. They dismissed Mara without punishment, but with eyes that measured her more carefully than before. When the chamber emptied, Aaron approached her. His voice was low, filled with awe.
"Mara, do you realize what you have done? They speak of changing the Accord."
"That has not been considered in generations." She looked at him, her calm eyes softening slightly. "It is not what I have done, Aaron. It is what they have seen in themselves. I only gave them a mirror. What they do with the reflection is their choice." Aaron nodded, though his thoughts still swirled. He walked beside her as they left the chamber. The corridors of the station seemed brighter, filled with travelers unaware of the storm of words that had just passed. That night, Aaron wrote in his archive, "A human faced the envoys of great empires and did not bow. She spoke of fear and of choice. She claimed no authority, only responsibility." Her words shook the hall. The question of humanity's place among the Accord is now alive. History has turned a corner. But when he closed his recorder, sleep did not come easily. He knew that words had power, but power always carried weight. The weight of choice was now pressing upon every envoy, every banner, and perhaps upon humanity itself. Mara had spoken with clarity, yet Aaron wondered if she carried the burden of her own words. She had stepped into the heart of the galaxy's oldest council, and by doing so she had forced them to look at themselves. Such things could not be undone, and so as the station's lights dimmed, Aaron lay awake with one thought that would not fade. The galaxy had seen a glimpse of humanity's strength, not in ships or armies, but in the refusal to remain silent. From this moment onward, nothing would be the same. The station above Terran moved in its usual cycle of lights and shadows, yet the rhythm felt altered. On the surface, trade continued. Shuttles docked and departed, and voices filled the concourses. But beneath that normal motion, a quiet current flowed. The envoys who had once treated humanity as a minor race now spoke of them in closed chambers. The guards who had once ignored human travelers now watched them with new caution. The change was not written on walls or carved into law, but it was there, alive in whispers and glances. For Aaron, the archivist, each day of recording now carried a new weight. He still wrote about the usual disputes, the markets, and the flow of visitors. Yet his attention always turned back to Mara. Wherever she walked, he followed at a respectful distance, not as a spy, but as a witness. He believed her presence itself was part of history, and he feared missing even the smallest piece of it. Mara did not speak much in those days. She spent her hours walking the station's halls, sometimes pausing to listen to the quarrels of merchants, sometimes sitting in silence near the great window that overlooked the stars. She was never in a hurry, never loud, never surrounded by followers. She moved as quietly as she had arrived, yet the silence around her seemed larger now. One evening, After a day of tense meetings between rival factions, Mara stood once more in the central hall beneath the banners of the Accord. Aaron was nearby, recording from the gallery above. The chamber was empty of envoys, but the banners still hung, each one bright under the lights. She looked up at them the same way she had the first time, steady and thoughtful. Aaron felt his chest tighten. He remembered her question clearly. What do they fear most? Now he believed the answer had begun to show itself. The envoys feared that one human voice might matter as much as their fleets. They feared that the youngest species could stand in their halls and remind them of truths they preferred to hide. At last she spoke, her voice low but clear enough for him to hear from above. They will argue again. They will shout, and some may raise weapons, but they will remember. And that is enough. Aaron climbed down from the gallery, gathering his courage. He stood beside her under the banners. "Mara," he said, "when you leave the station, what will happen then? Will it all fade?" She turned her calm eyes toward him. "History never fades, Aaron. Once a thing is seen, it cannot be unseen. They cannot forget that they lowered their weapons because of a human voice. Even if they deny it, even if they dismiss it, the truth has already entered them. Change may come slowly, but it will come." Her words filled him with both hope and unease. Change was not always gentle. He knew that the great empires valued their pride above all. To admit that a human had shifted their course was something they might resist with anger. Yet he also knew that no one could erase what had happened. The following cycles proved her words true. Disputes continued, but they never again reached the edge of violence inside the Accord chamber. Envoys spoke with more care, as if reminded of the weight of their choices. Some still looked upon Mara with suspicion, but others watched her with new respect. A few even approached her quietly, seeking her opinion before meetings began. Aaron recorded it all. His archive grew thick with notes of her presence, her words, and the ripple she had set into motion. When he looked back at his earliest entries, he saw how small they seemed compared to what had followed. He realized he was no longer just recording events. He was recording the beginning of something larger than the station itself. One night, after many cycles, Mara prepared to leave. She carried only a small pack, as she had when she arrived. There was no announcement, no escort, no farewell ceremony. She simply walked toward the docking bay where a transport ship waited. Aaron hurried after her, his heart heavy. "You are leaving," he said, his voice quiet but strained. "Yes," she replied calmly. "My time here is finished." He struggled for words. "But your presence changed everything. If you leave now, will it not weaken what you began?" Mara stopped and looked at him. For the first time, her expression softened into a faint smile. "Aaron's strength is not mine to hold. It is theirs to carry now. I only reminded them of what they already feared and what they could already choose. They will not forget, whether they admit it or not. They will carry this moment forward. My leaving does not erase it." Aaron lowered his head. "I will write all of it. I will make sure it is remembered." Her eyes held his for a long moment. "Then you are part of this too. You are not only recording history. You are shaping how it will be seen. Do not forget the weight of that." She turned then and walked into the docking bay. The doors closed behind her, and moments later the small ship lifted away from the station. Aaron remained standing in the corridor long after she was gone. His recorder was still in his hand, but he could not bring himself to write just yet. He felt as if the air around him had shifted. He had witnessed the arrival of change, and now he watched it leave, yet the echo remained. When he finally returned to his archive desk, he began the longest entry he had ever written. A human came to the station quietly. She carried no army, no authority, no wealth. Yet she looked into the eyes of envoys and made them see themselves. She spoke of fear and of choice. She turned anger into silence. She left as quietly as she came, but her presence will not leave us. Nothing is the same as before. As he wrote, he realized something else. He had always believed the role of an archivist was only to watch. But now he understood that recording truth was itself a form of courage. By writing her story faithfully, he was ensuring that her voice would not fade, that the galaxy would one day know what had begun in the Hall of Banners. In the cycles that followed, the whispers of Mara spread farther. Travelers carried stories of the human who calmed the Accord Hall. Some tales exaggerated, some shrank, but all agreed on one point. A human had changed the course of events with nothing but words, and so the legend grew. Some feared it, some admired it, but none could ignore it. Aaron continued his work as an archivist, yet he no longer saw his task as small. He had seen what one voice could do. He had seen that silence could be broken and that history could shift, because a human refused to let fear rule. Whenever he walked the halls of the station and passed beneath the circle of banners, he remembered her standing there calm and unarmed, holding the chamber with her voice. He remembered how she looked at him the first day she arrived, a simple glance that had told him the world was about to change. And in his heart, he knew she was right. Nothing was the same again.